Why was Jango Fett the person that Dooku respected more than anyone else? Dooku is a complicated individual that only becomes more complex as time goes on. But the one thing that's the most difficult to pin down about him is who exactly he admires. After becoming a Sith, Dooku soon begins to see himself as better than pretty much everyone, and treats very few people with respect until they can prove their worth. And even then, Dooku's standards are extremely high, so high that he barely respects any of the Jedi. While Yoda was his teacher and remains the most powerful Jedi, Dooku doesn't exactly respect him because of his decision making. As far as Sidious goes, Dooku definitely fears Palpatine, but he's also looking to betray him, so respect may not be in the picture here in exactly the definition. However, the respect that the Count would be given to one of the most unlikely people of the galaxy is absolutely astonishing. A non-Force sensitive Mandalorian bounty hunter who turned out to be one of the only people that actually managed to outsmart Dooku and gained his complete respect. So sit with us today as we open another holocron and learn the full story of why Dooku respected Jango so much that he soon refused to work with anybody else. Greetings Acolytes, welcome to the archives, and let us begin. 10 years prior to the Battle of Geonosis and the outbreak of the Clone War, Sidious visited Dooku at his mansion via hologram. He asked the Count if he had decided on who to select for the Clone Army project, as Sidious had tasked Dooku with finding an optimal candidate that could produce clones which would one day be able to conquer the Jedi. Dooku, staring gravely into a case of lightsabers, said that there was only one man who was suitable for such a job, a man who had killed a group of Jedi with his bare hands. 2 years earlier, Dooku had met Jango Fett as a Jedi during a mission gone wrong on the planet of Galadran. The tragedy of this single mission would remain in Dooku's memory for the remainder of his life, and he would even include an account of it during his own recording in the Sith Talos holocron. This was a defining moment for Dooku. On the snowy world of Galadran, there was a battle between the two last most prominent factions of the Mandalorian warriors. Two groups, one known as the True Mandalorians and the other Death Watch. This was in the era when Mandalore the planet had been declared a peaceful and a pacifist society, banishing all who followed the warrior ways to a planet known as Concord Dawn. But the war between these factions brought them to Galadran, where the leader of the True Mandalorians, Jaster Meriel, had brought his protege Jango Fett on his very first mission. However, things quickly went awry when Deathwatch showed up under the command of Tor Vizsla, who killed Master Jester right in front of Jango's very eyes. This event would change Jango forever because he already had the history with Tor Vizsla. When he was just a small child, the war between the True Mandalorians and Deathwatch had made it to his home world. There, Tor Vizsla had found Jango as a child and ended up beating his father to death in front of him. However, Jango himself was saved by Jaster Meriel. Now that Vizsla had killed Jaster, this made him responsible for the deaths of both of Jango Fett's fathers. Vowing vengeance, Jango was on a warpath, making a deal with the governor of Galadran that if Jango helped him take care of a growing rebellion, that the governor would tell him where Vizsla was. However, what Jango did not know was that the governor had double-crossed him and was actually working with Deathwatch. Under Tor Vizsla's instructions, the governor had sent out a distress call to the Jedi, telling them that the Mandalorians were on their world terrorizing cities and killing innocents, including women and children, framing Jango Fett. The so-called evidence of this was kindly provided by Deathwatch. Dooku recalls having been the one selected to lead such a harsh mission. Master Thame supplied him with all the information he needed about the history of the Mandalorians, and specifically who they were going up against. Taking with him 5 Republic cruisers to Galadran, Dooku ruefully explains how the specific Jedi went on this mission were selected not because they were good at combat, but because of their proximity to Galadran. They were told that the innocents were dying, and there was no time to call together a task force of experienced Jedi. So they took whatever Jedi were closest to the world and their missions, and sent them with Dooku as their leader, who also brought with him his brash young Padawan by the name of Komori Vosa. Dooku mentions that unlike him, the Jedi had very little experience with the Mandalorians, so they had no idea what they were truly up against. Being Deathwatch after realizing the governor had betrayed him, he sees the Jedi cruisers closing in and ran back to the Mandalorian camp to warn his brethren. With his comlink being damaged, he was unable to warn them before the Jedi arrived, and Jango was just a moment too late. Dooku and the Jedi task force showed up at the Mandalorian base camp. calling for their orderly surrender. Komori Vosa then opened her large mouth and threatened the Mandalorians with violence. Jango, who was already on edge in the events prior, takes this as a provocation and commanded the Mandalorians to open fire on the Jedi. A massive battle then ensued between the Jedi and the Mandalorians like the battles of old, and the fight ended in a bloodbath. There were heavy casualties on both sides, with the inexperienced Jedi unprepared for the tactical brilliance of the Mandalorians. But with both Dooku and Komori Vosa on the Jedi side, for every single Jedi that fell, 5 Mandalorians would fall as well. In the end, out of sheer desperation, one of the young Jedi decided to pull off an illegal lightsaber move against a Mandalorian by the name of Miles, one of Jango Fett's closest friends that he saw as his own apprentice. The Jedi ruthlessly cut the Mandalorian in half mid-air. This instantly sent Jango Fett into a frenzy, and Dooku remembers lowering his lightsaber to watch it all unfold, awestruck by such pure ferocity. Jango grabs one of the Jedi and ends him with a brutal armored punch to the face. After downing another Jedi with a kick, Jango turns to a third and picks up a rock before bashing him across the face. Finally, surrounded by fallen Jedi, Jango Fett turned to the one who killed Miles. Jango throws snow in his face, ducks under the Jedi's wild strike, and disarms him of his lightsaber, ending the fight with a helmet smash directly to the Jedi's face. The Jedi would stumble over and would die from the sheer concussive force of the Mandalorian Beskar helmet. Jango stood as the last Mandalorian in his camp, having killed 3 Jedi and defeated 3 more with nothing but his bare hands. Dooku did not interfere, having been frozen in shock at the entire encounter. But let's not discuss further without hearing directly from what Dooku recorded in the holocron. As a Jedi, I could neither hate nor fear Jango Fett, but I did feel something for him that surprised me. I felt deep respect. Had Fett and I been the only survivors of that battle, I would have lowered my lightsaber and bid him a safe journey. He was the last of his kind, and I'd never known another being who so thoroughly deserved to go wherever they pleased in the galaxy. But other Jedi had survived, and I doubted that we were unanimous in our regard for Fett. In the end, it was the Council who decided his fate. For via transmission, they ordered me to turn Jango Fett over to Galadran's governor, and like a gutless animal, I obeyed their order. Despite being a Jedi, Dooku greatly respected Jango Fett from how he had handled himself in battle. He was genuinely astonished by his physical ability, and for the rest of Dooku's life, he was disgusted at himself for turning Jango over to the governor. The entire debacle bothered Dooku so much that he did his own research, and later found out that the entire thing had been a setup, and the Jedi were manipulated. While he didn't blame the Jedi for being deceived, Dooku did blame them for failing to investigate or meditate on the matter to determine the truth. This single mission would be one of the biggest pushes towards his disillusionment with the Jedi, and for 2 years, Dooku would remember Jango Fett, becoming more and more fascinated with the bounty hunter, until he vouched for him to be the genetic template to his master, Sidious. Dooku later found out that Jango had escaped custody and was now a successful bounty hunter. Now under the pseudonym of Tyrannus, Dooku called Jango to one of his manors in order to discuss an offer. They sat down, placing each of their weapons at the opposite end of the table. Jango's blasters in front of Dooku, and Dooku's lightsaber in front of Jango. After the Mandalorian heard Tyrannus' offer, he thought it sounded good, but he explained that he did not trust Dooku. Dooku had been a Jedi. But then the Count reveals that he had been there that day on Galadran. Immediately, Jango stood up, and his blasters flew straight into his hands from across the table. Dooku, for once, was caught off guard, exclaiming that he felt no gift of the Force inside of Jango. But Jango simply told him that his gloves were electromagnetic. Dooku commended him for his cleverness as he summoned and ignited his own lightsaber. Although it would seem as if Jango would be defeated here, Jango smiled and said that he was the one with the upper hand, and that if he wants, Dooku is already dead. Calmly, Dooku senses that he's been poisoned, or rather, infected with a deadly virus. Jango explains that it is known as the Kartos Plague, a virus native to his home planet of Concord Dawn. He had released the spores from his armor as soon as he had walked into the room. In 40 minutes, Dooku would be blind, and in an hour, he would be brain dead. Dooku could sense that Jango had not been infected since he had been inoculated with a vaccine when he was a young child. Furthermore, Jango explains that while he does have an antidote, that it was on his ship, and that his ship was rigged to self-destruct, linked to a heart monitor on his chest plate. If Jango died and his heart stopped, the ship explodes, and with it, the antidote to Dooku's life. Dooku, though, is not afraid, rather thoroughly impressed. Jango Fett had outsmarted him and put him in a carefully laid out trap. Dooku tells him that he will give him whatever he wants for the cure. But not only that, he desperately wants to know how Jango managed to escape Galadran. Fett obliges the Sith Lord and recalls how the governor had sold him into slavery. Punishment. For several years, Jango rotted as a slave before taking his opportunity to escape when pirates attacked the vessel that he was working on. Jango killed his slavers before escaping and going back to the governor's palace on Galadran. It would be there where Jango would claim the Mandalorian armor that was once worn by Miles. This would be the blue and silver colored armor that we most associate with Jango Fett. Jango then forced the governor to tell him where Tor Vizsla was. Finding Deathwatch's ship, Jango sends a starfighter to crash right into the engine block, damaging the sublight drive and the life support system. The ship is doomed to explode within mere minutes. Jango himself flies right through the viewport of the command bridge and enters mortal combat with Tor Vizsla, finally finding his old enemy. An explosion caused Jango to lose the initial fight, but like a madman, Jango was hellbent on revenge. He followed Vizsla into an escape pod, continuing their fight as they jettisoned from the ship, landing on a nearby planet right as the vessel exploded. On the wild frontier world, Jango kicks Vizsla out of the escape pod and continues to beat him mercilessly. However, after they both fall and nearly drown in a river, Tor Vizsla gained the upper hand and stuck Jango with a poison needle. He explains that it's not enough to kill him since Vizsla wanted the honor himself, but this would prove to be his greatest mistake. Along with Vizsla's overconfidence, out of Fett's forearm came a blade that Jango uses to slash Vizsla right across the stomach, nearly disemboweling the Mandalorian warrior. However, Jango's aim was not to kill Vizsla with that strike, but to spill his blood. The nearby dire cats smelled this, and like sharks, they surrounded and attacked Vizsla, tearing him apart while he was still alive, screaming. The predators, however, left Jango Fett alone, as apparently the poison within his system caused them to associate him as dead meat. Jango laid there for a long time until he was found by a group of children that were native to the world. They helped him back to his feet, and Jango went on his way. Ending the story, Jango tells Dooku that he wants an unaltered clone for himself to have as an apprentice, in order to honor his own father, Jaster Meriel, and his legacy. Dooku obliges and explains that the virus in his system was no longer an issue. As Jango was telling the story, Dooku had used the Force to flush it from his body. This time, Jango Fett was the one that was impressed. And now that the two men had a mutual understanding and a strong respect for one another, they began their long partnership. Jango would end up being the man that Dooku entrusted with the mission to kill his former Padawan Komori Vosa, which Jango took great pleasure in, since the two of them had history of Galadran. And we can see that when Windu beheaded Jango Fett on Geonosis, Dooku was actually greatly disturbed. From that point on, he would never treat any other bounty hunter the same way that he did Jango Fett. And interestingly, this would not be the end of the Sith's respect for the Fett bloodline. Sidious took note of Dooku's fascination for Jango, and so he kept an eye on Boba Fett. In the Imperial era, both Sidious and Vader held an extreme high regard for Boba, employing him for many high-profile missions on behalf of the Empire. Sidious would even go on to compliment Boba as being worthy of the Mandalorian armor, and among the finest warriors that the galaxy had ever seen. But anyway, my friends and acolytes, this was why Count Dooku absolutely adored Jango Fett, and believed there was simply no one like him in the galaxy. Not just a simple bounty hunter, or a powerful Mandalorian, Jango was truly special. But did you know about this before watching our holocron? And did you know just how much respect Dooku had for Jango Fett? If you enjoyed this style of video and would like to see more, be sure to comment suggestions down below. Thank you as always, my friends, for sitting with us today in this holocron reading. May the Force be with you always, and I will hopefully see you in the archives again soon.